Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's Dr. Simmons with another session of preaching and preachers on Facebook Live. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Come on in and let me know that you are out there. Good morning to my people on the West Coast and my guest from the West Coast. Come on in. Let me know that you all are out there. All right. I see people coming in. This is going to be an amazing broadcast today. Come on in. I see people coming in. There we go. There we go. Come on in and let me know that you are out there. Have you with me? Come on in and in the name of at least one other person who you know needs to view this. Do it right now, or it'll be up on my page for 2 weeks, and they can view in their leisure. Reverend Chalice Bradford, good to have you with me. Come on in. I see people coming in. Good morning to some. Good afternoon to others. Come on in. Come on in. All right. Come on in. All right. We see folk are coming in. I know that number. It tells me it's time to move on. All right. Come on in. Come on in. I see you all out there. Type in the name of at least one person that you know will benefit from this broadcast. They can watch it. Jump on right now. Watch it in their leisure from my page for 2 weeks. Let me go ahead and get started. As always, we're praying for those who are sick, praying for those experiencing a season of bereavement. We're praying for the Congo. This country does not do Africa well, but you need to really be aware of what's going on in the Congo. And yeah, we're praying for Gaza and for Palestine and Israel. And I know that as you're doing your Advent and Christmas churching, please know that Bethlehem is in Palestine. Please understand that. Please understand that we are praying for those by war all over. Quick announcements. Starting an initiative in January for women who want to become senior pastors. Got to figure out a way to level. So starting in January through the Women of Color Ministry Project, we're going to give special help to women who want to be senior pastors. Nothing else except senior pastors. So pay attention to the Women Ministry page for that initiative, which begins in January 2nd. The Women of Color Ministry broadcast December 29th at 8 p.m., their last broadcast of the year, and they're closing strong with women who are homileticians. Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, the incoming president of the Academy of Homiletics. Dr. Courtney Buss, the director of the PhD program in American Preaching at CS, and Reverend Williams, who I think she's an up-and-coming politician, and she is very, very talented, okay? And join them for their last broadcast of the year. I may sneak the broadcast before the year is over, but I don't know about that. So this might be my last broadcast of the year, and it is major. It's major, okay? Let me also say in terms of announcements, I've been posting all week, and the funerals of Carlton Pearson, Gabe Byron, Dr. Charles Adams put this on my mind to do more to tackle the lynching of our own people. We've seen other folks out there doing it. We need to do better. So if you are interested in doing that, also shoot me an email, women of color in ministry at gmail.com. I'm not trying to lead an effort, I'm not trying to do that, but I'm really willing to help those who want to do it, find publishers and things like that. All right. Finally, let me say, this is my last broadcast of the year. Thank you for your support. In September, I began my 7th year of doing this. I can't believe that, but it's according to Facebook, year number 7. And so I want to say thank you for your support throughout the years. It has been an amazing year, friend. So thank you so much for that. All right, let's get to the topic. And I'm hoping that we've got one other guest who I hope is able to join us. He was having some internet issues, but hopefully they will be cleared up. Our topic for today is pastoring. The first 5, what folk go through, the first 5 years. And if you are watching this broadcast, type in the name of one other person you know will benefit from this broadcast. They can watch it now, or it'll be up on my page for 2 weeks. Today we have older pastors, persons pastoring mid-sized churches, persons who are pastoring mega churches, and to join us, Wesley is the second church plant. Okay, get to my guests. Let me introduce them. Dr. Joshua Mitchell is the 7th senior pastor of the historic 31st Street Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. He's an alumnus of Howard University, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts, and he received his Master of Divinity and the Doctor of Ministry degree from the Singlewood DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union. And he is the author of Black Millennials and the Church, Meet Me Where I Am, published by Judson Press. He's also a faculty member in the African Studies Department at the University in Reverend in November 2020. Light of the Church, Disciples of Christ, elected to be their 6th senior pastor, and of course, the first female pastor in the 154-year history of that church. Pastor Janae Murdoch is a graduate of the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication Studies. She graduated also from Carnegie Mellon with a Master's of Science in Public Policy and Management. Attended United Theological Seminary, where she obtained the MDiv and the Master of Business Administration. And the Master of Business Administration is from the University of Memphis. Okay, she offers as chaplain of the Midwest region, includes Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ontario, Canada. And she is a board member of the Disciples of Christ Historical Society. Reverend Quantez Pressley serves as the lead pastor of the 3rd New Hope Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. He is a member of Omega Psi Phi. He wanted that up, yo. He's a member of Omega Psi Phi. He's a graduate of Morehouse College with a Bachelor's of Arts in Religion, and he attended Union Theological Seminary in New York, where he obtained the Master of Divinity degree in Social Ethics. He also serves as the chair of the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners. All right, our Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thomson. She is described as a transformational preacher. She currently serves as the senior pastor of the Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland, California. Her 2019 election history nationwide. She was the first woman called to serve as senior pastor of this historic African American Baptist church, which was founded in 1919. She served in several other ministerial capacities before becoming the senior pastor, and she also served as the assistant pastor. She is currently on the teaching staff of the Berkeley Theology, where she teaches in the areas of public theology and preaching. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Political Economics from UC Berkeley, Washington, and then at Fuller Theological Seminary. She is the highest ranking woman in the Progressive National Baptist Convention, where she serves as second vice president. I think I'm just about all right. There he is. I think we just about got Reverend Wesley. If the internet will let me, be great. Here's hoping to join us. There he is. There he is. All right. Reverend Christopher Wesley was elected to succeed his father as the senior pastor of Antioch Fellowship Church until it doesn't. We're gonna get them back. All right. There we go. There we go. All right. A preacher and a worship leader. He is the leader of Chris Wesley and Undignified Days, and produced multiple projects. Their 828 Live in Dallas was released in January of 23, and it features their single "Feel It Good" that Pastor Wesley wrote to leading Anti-Dignified Praise. He is the young adult director of the National Baptist Convention of America, under director of Dr. Samuel Burke, and he is currently enrolled at the Samuel Doctor School of Theology, pursuing his MD. All right, we're going to keep working. Not sure what's causing Pastor Wesley to join us. Count on it. He is going to join us. Wesley, Pastor Wesley, can you hear us? Pastor Wesley?
Yes, ma'am. Loud and clear.
Are you with us?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
All right. All right, Adam. Let's get right to it then. Change very much. Just get to people and load the community. Pastor Pitts Murdoch. Is that still true? Was that what happened with you?
Well, it was what happened with me in terms of getting to know the community, building relationship with those who are here at Light of the World. Within a 10-year span, Light of the World experienced 3 different pastors. The first was a 43-year pastor who retired. Then the next pastor served 7 years, resigned. There was a season without a pastor for almost a year. I came as an interim and was elected after the interim. And so for me, it was necessary to build relationship with the people, to help them feel cared for, to help them feel seen. It was a people project when I first came. And so I would say that it is true, at least in my context, that it was necessary to get to know the people, not just the people here at Light of the World, but who Light of the World was in context in Indianapolis, Indiana, and understanding what role they played in the city, understanding what was also happening in city politics and city government, because Light of the World had a long history and still has a long history in being active in the community as well. So these first few years has been as much me learning the people as it is the people learning me.
Okay, we're having a we've gotten Janae, Pastor, excuse me, Pitts Murdoch. Pastor Wesley, what was your experience? Because I know you became the pastor after your father, and that church had been a church plant. So what the first 2 years, what were they like?
I had a very interesting experience. Thank you for asking and allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Had a very interesting experience in the fact that my church, the church that I pastor, was my home church. I was born and bred in this church. I spent about a decade away in other ministry endeavors and pursuits. My father was diagnosed with cancer in 2018, and I came back on staff to serve alongside of him, handle a lot of the preaching load. He was declared cancer free at the top of 2019. And then in November 2019, the cancer returned. He passed away in a period of a month. He went from everything being fine to everything going wrong. And the church didn't know a whole lot for that last month as we were trying to navigate through what was going on with his health. So my father passed away November 2019. Our church bylaws allowed for him to have a successor that would be elected by the church. So on February 9th, 2020, I was overwhelmingly elected to be his successor, but the world shut down a month later. And so our church was navigating grief together. Then we had to kind of go into a virtual space, and our church really didn't have a virtual footprint. There weren't a whole lot of, like, while there was technology, there wasn't a whole lot of focus on virtual things and streaming things. And so it was a challenge in the fact that I was forced to do a whole lot of immediate change because the world changed overnight. And in addition, we had some staff transitions happening. So it was an interesting time. The blessing is I had some pre-existing relationships in the leadership community because that was my home church. Dallas is my home city. And so by God's grace, I was already kind of familiar in a certain sense. But I did have to make a lot of immediate changes. Everything that I did goes against the whole book. Don't change anything in the first 2 years. But I literally was in a position that forced me to have to do a whole lot of stuff. And one of the things that I was sharing with our leadership and even some pastor friends is I felt myself really being forced to be led by the Spirit in what in the world do we do in a time that makes no sense with a grieving people. And so the first 2 years were exceptionally challenging in that regard.
Yeah, and you were grieving as well. Thomson, how were your first? And you had been the assistant pastor. So tell me about your first couple of years. Was it about the people, loving the people, getting to know the community? Tell me a bit about your first 2 years.
First, let me begin. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this great conversation. And I actually can identify with both Pastor Murdoch and Pastor Wesley. I had served on staff previously as the assistant pastor, probably close to 10 years. And so Allen Temple is my home church. I've been a member there since I was 12 years old. Like Pastor Wesley, went away to DC, was gone about 15 years and came back. So I had relationship with the people. But 2019 was our 100-year centennial. The senior pastor announced he was leaving. They had a process. I was elected and installed in December, and the world shut down in March. And so it was a combination of both. It wasn't the old adage of don't change anything. We had to change everything. Because in addition to pastoring, Allen Temple, as you well know, is a very active church in areas of justice in the area and nationally. And we have people who were dying, and we had systems and structures that were failing right before our very eyes. And so immediately I had to pivot and figure out how we were going to keep the connection. We had just come off a whole year celebration. The people had been together, loving each other. All of a sudden, they couldn't touch, they couldn't communicate. We were blessed to already be online. So that was an easy pivot, but it was the idea for me, I think, of having to balance taking on a whole nother issue of literally figuring out how we're going to keep our people from passing away, both in the community and in the church. And then at the same time, having to navigate people's expectations. Because even if you have been on staff at a church, in the minds of people, the assistant role or the associate role, when you ascend to the senior role, particularly as a woman, they're trying to figure out if the building gonna fall down, is it gonna catch on fire, what's gonna happen, is she gonna ruin everything? And so it was a balancing act. But I can identify with both Pastor Wesley in terms of having to be led by the Spirit, make sure that you're comforting people, because in their situation, of course, it was the grief of their pastor and his father, but we were grieving the loss of ritual, the loss of connection, the inability to be able to bury our loved ones the way we are accustomed to. We could not even go in the hospitals at the time and visit those who have been impacted by COVID. And so it's that balancing act. Pastor Janae having to make sure you're loving the people, letting them know that, everything is going to be all right. We don't know when, because they told us 2 weeks and 2 weeks became 2 years, but also making sure that you are kind of doing the work that was going to keep the congregation stable.
Yeah. Pastor, tell us about your first 2 years. What, is it the old adage apply? Did you spend time getting to people in the community, or what was different? Did COVID get you as well?
Yeah, well, let me also express my gratitude, Dr. Simmons, for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. This is a bucket list item, and I'm glad I got in before the year is out. But yeah, I'm afraid I might be a bit redundant because I had similar experiences. I served as associate pastor at Third New Hope 2 years prior to becoming lead pastor. I began my leadership of the ministry January 1, 2020. I had 10 weeks pre-pandemic before the world changed. And so I went into the assignment with every expectation to hold on to that adage. I even told them during the transition process that I'm a slow walker. I try not to move fast. And so that definitely was my intentions. But God clearly had another plan. And looking hindsight, though, I did see it as a blessing. So while I served as associate pastor for 2 years prior, I came to that ministry as youth pastor about 10 years before. And so, really was integrated in the ministry, and the opportunity to kind of sit in the second seat gave me some ideas on things that I wanted to change, some adjustments that needed to be made. But I knew that some would come with battle scars and knots and wounds. But again, the pandemic kind of created a clean slate for those changes to be made without the kind of fighting and battles that might have happened. So funny enough, I succeeded the Reverend Dr. E.O. Branch, who served there for 42 years, a stellar ministry. And his last sermon on Watch Night, he titled it A Clean Slate. And so his first time returning back to the church was actually the day that the governor executed the executive order restraining restrictions. So we're in the pastor's office after service, and we're talking about how it is. And I said, Doc, I blame you, because that sermon you preached, the clean slate, God must have heard it, and it indeed did shake things up to create that clean slate. And he was tickled to know that he got out at the right time to not have to deal with all of the things that I was adjusting to. But again, having been a part of that ministry, being a son of Detroit, didn't necessarily need too much time to kind of learn the city or the membership, but still intended on moving slowly. But again, the pandemic accelerated that a bit.
Yeah. Pastor, let's see, I've gotten to Dr. Mitchell, your first 2 years. Tell us about it. Did the old adage apply, or did COVID change everything too?
Not at all, Dr. Simmons. First of all, thank you again for the opportunity to be a part of this call with these wonderful colleagues. I had a list of things that I said I would not do and would do. I was serving on staff at Will Avenue in Houston, Texas for about 7 years, and was called to our church at 31st Street on March the 2nd, 2020. So I maybe come up in February for a candidate week, and we were voted in on the 2nd. I was supposed to start April the 12th. The world shut down on March the 15th. And so my first day on the job, there were 7 people in the church. And so I never got, and still to this day, I met a gentleman yesterday in worship who said, I'm a longtime 31st member. This is our first time meeting in person. I'm in my 4th year now, and there are still people I have not met. So I have no preconceived notion of who we were before I got there, except what was in the history and all these kind of things. And I didn't have the opportunity to really get to know the people either in a classic kind of way. So I began to learn people through their comments in the comment section, and began to preach to names and Gmail account names on Sundays. And we were doing pre-recorded before we streamed. So that was my version, and had the opportunity to kind of get to know leaders, but really didn't get to know the people. I got to know the history during that time of our church. Did a lot of reading, a lot of conversations with our leaders to get a sense of who we were prior to the pandemic. But to echo what I've heard, I had to change a lot. We did not have a digital footprint at all. We didn't have a website. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have online giving. There was no way to give in a virtual space. Change the way the worship service ran. All these kind of things. Not because that was my plan, but because we needed to do it. And so I always look at those first 2 years as we survived. Praise the Lord. We survived. We were in survival mode, just trying to figure things out. And learning one another through screens and comment sections. But I thank God that we made it through those first two.
Well, most of the church world was trying to figure out how to survive. So I just thought it important to hear your testimonies and your stories for all pastors who in those first 2 years may not be able to employ the old adage of get to know the people, love people, get to know the community, etc., because of whatever it is. In this case, it was COVID. So, I'm glad to hear your different experience. And Pastor Wesley is going from losing a father, also dealing with, so just vast experiences. So that said, Pastor Pitts Murdoch, you got COVID, all of those, you're the first woman. Did you feel the urgency, to say, I got to grow this church numerically? Was that an urge for you?
It was not an urgent push for me. Like Dr. Thomson said, as we are coming through and out of pandemic, we're trying to keep people alive, and we're saying farewell to folks who are dying. Growing the church numerically was not at the top of my list. I have a pastor mentor who helped me manage my expectations, though, as it related to who comes back, who doesn't come back. How do you navigate the grief that comes from the people who return after the pandemic, and they don't see the people they saw before the pandemic. Who also helped me manage my expectations around, all right, if your attendance was X before pandemic, this is what you should expect after the pandemic. And so I was fortunate enough to have conversation partners to navigate managing the expectations around attendance, around membership. And in my context, I really wanted the congregation to feel secure, to feel stable, to feel God's presence with them as we were navigating layers, layers of complexity. So it's COVID, it's a new pastor is a woman. And while Indianapolis is a great city, it is not known as the most progressive city around gender equity, particular in the religious space. And so it was a navigating of a lot of complex issues, on top of the fact that I am married to a college professor who is endowed tenured professor at the University of Arkansas. So it was also navigating, her family doesn't look like the traditional family. So it was helping people navigate complex layers of what our new life was together. So growing the church numerically was not at the top of my list, but I also realized if I grow the people, growing the people will grow the church. And so that has been what my focus has been. I do my job in growing the people and building disciples and building followers of Jesus Christ, then the numeric growth will come.
I think we kind of lost Reverend Pitts Murdoch. Repeat the end. We had you broke up.
I was saying that I did not focus on numeric growth, but rather I focused on growing the people. Because if I grow the people, then growing numerically will eventually come.
Reverend Wesley, what was it for you? Was, after COVID, let's go after COVID. Was there a push within you, leadership, anyone, to say, let's grow?
That's such a good question. One of the interesting things about COVID, and to a point that I think preachers and pastors all over the world came to understand, is when you preach to empty rooms for a couple years, 5 people shouting you down in the room feels way better than the empty room. So it didn't matter if it was 5 people or 5,000 people in the room. To have anybody in that room after pre-recording and preaching to the walls felt good. And so for a while, numbers don't even cross your mind. You're just happy to be back in the room with anybody. What I will say is similar to the point of what was just shared by Pastor Chris Murdoch. Because we were still so young in our transition, my biggest push was to say, okay, Lord, who are you calling us to be as a church? So it was less about numerical growth and more about cultural growth. So we spend a whole lot of time preaching through or working through what is our DNA as a church, what is our culture. And as we did that work, we started to see a shift in the people in the church. Because to a point that was just shared, like everybody that was there pre-pandemic hadn't come back post-pandemic. But we've seen in our churches, instance, a whole lot of faces post-pandemic that we never saw before pandemic, because we started to do a work of being intentional about shaping our culture and saying, this is who we are. This is who we feel like the Lord is calling us to be. So even now, I think, one of the things that we shared from a leadership standpoint is our goal is building infrastructure before we look for increase. How do we set our culture, set our staff, and set our direction in place so that we are in essence preparing our nets for the catch. We didn't want to be guilty of, casting nets that will break, if that makes sense.
That's good.
And so our goal was infrastructure before
Absolutely.
increase. And as we know about transition, just because, people were members of that church because your predecessor was their pastor does not mean you were their pastor. So the reality for a lot of people is in transition, you have to be okay with the reality that there are people who are members of that church that ain't never going to be with you. They'll never see you as their shepherd. And that transition is going to allow time and space for people to transition away. And so if numbers are the goal, you're going to be grossly disappointed and feel consistently insecure, particularly in the first few years, because people are just trying to see how they feel about you, your leadership, your direction, your style, your vision. And one of the things that I came to grips with early on is I ain't for everybody. Everybody's not doesn't feel called to me, and that gets to be okay. And so I think in building infrastructure, it allows for space for transition, in building culture and saying very clearly, this is who we are. This is who we feel like the Lord has called us to be. This is who we feel like the Lord has called us to serve intentionally. These are the things that we feel most called to do and the systems we're most called to attack. Then some people will say, that's for me, that's not for me, and that gets to be okay. But for us, it was always about infrastructure before increase. And so I feel like the Lord's honored that.
Okay. Reverend Pressley, how about you? I mean, were you under any pressure? COVID is over, and a lot of things are going on in churches around the country. Were you under that? Let me get numbers up. Was that pressure applied to you?
I would say that the pressure wasn't to get the numbers up. The pressure was to make sure the numbers don't go down. I think that was what I was like wrestling with, succeeding a living legend. It's like, let me not lose this church, like, can I at least stabilize us at a certain level? And so that was pre-pandemic. And then I'm gonna be honest, I have some insecurities, right? And in my insecurities, I hated virtual worship because on Facebook, they put the number of people who are watching right there at the top corner of the screen. And my members were impacted by that. And so they're screenshotting. It's like, oh, we had 300 people on today, or there was 500 people on today. And that was just way too much for me to be marking and measuring. So I had to kind of release that. And then I would say the other numerical kind of maintenance that was really pressure for me was the budget. So again, I inherited a ministry that had maybe 15 staff members, about $1.5 million budget. And I'm a new pastor and the pandemic hit, and I'm saying, I'm going to have to lay these people off. Like, they're going to hate me to have to cut salaries and things of that nature. And so, numbers were a weight on me in these first few years. But the Lord's grace, indeed is sufficient, because that PPP loan came in and it really stabilized the budget. And the crazy thing about God, right?
Yeah.
So that PPP loan came in, and I'm thinking that it's going to fill a shortfall in the budget. But the week after we got approved, the members started giving at levels prior to the pandemic. So what it created was a surplus. And once I had that surplus, to be able to do ministry where you're not concerned about money and trying to make sure you got to pay bills and salaries, it did indeed free me to focus on ministry. And I've been able to carry that, even post-pandemic. And so I was grateful for some time to really be clear about what's my responsibility to do and what's God's responsibility to do. And I saw growing the church as God's responsibility. Like, okay, that's you. Okay, I'm going to do my part, and I'm going to hold you to do your part. And so I kind of live in that liberty now, and not being as pressured. But just to be quite honest and transparent, I mean, it was multiple levels where the numbers were a weight but I thank God for what he's allowed us to experience.
Budget numbers included.
Yes. Yes.
Dr. Mitchell, how about you? And you know the historic church, was there enough?
Yeah. So there was, but it wasn't at the top of the list. For me, the first piece for me was I had to grieve. I stepped in being voted in on March the 2nd with an idea of what it was going to look like my first day. And not walking in, I still have a picture in my office of the first day and nobody in the chairs. I saw multiple services. I at least saw the chicken dinner and the macaroni and cheese and the fellowship hall we were going to have. I never got to see that. I watched as my brothers and sisters enjoyed their installations and brought in all of their people, and I didn't get that. So I got to be honest and say I had to let that go in the beginning, because that wasn't my experience, and there was a piece of me that wanted that desired that. But what the pressure for me was not more people, but it was more young people, because I walked into an aging church, and what I could see was that we were going to be fine for the next 5 years. And what the pandemic did, as I spoke in several different places, folk just started dying. Faithful folk just started dying. And so there was this pressure from an institutional standpoint, institutional survival standpoint. If we don't get younger, if we don't use this window of time to find other people who will take on positions that will take on the weight of that budget, we are going to be in trouble. And there is an excitement about us being in the city together, 31st. And Pastor Mitchell, how do we maximize that to pull in whoever the next generation of 31st Street is going to be? And I still feel that pressure. I thank God that we have been able to grow numerically in ways that astound me and continue to grow. I'm grateful for that. But even with that, growing the people is important. As I heard Pastor Pitts Murdoch say, I needed to teach you what it is to live in a place of godly generosity. These are not things that the next generation of 31st Street understands, knows, and does innately. Our foundation, we tithe just because we were taught to tithe. We give just because we were taught to give, and we're going to do that whether we like Pastor's sermon or not, right? But I think there is a generation for me
Not now.
that needs to be cultivated. Not now,
Yeah.
but that needed to be cultivated to ensure that after the next 5, 10, 15 years of 31st Street, we could survive from an institutional perspective.
Pastor Thomson, I ask you a question because you went into a mega church and it's still a mega church. So I'm not really going to push you on the numbers, but I do want to know from you, Pastor Thomson, what one thing has really surprised you about being a senior pastor? You know, we have all of these ideas about what it'll be like. What one thing has surprised you? I know there have been many, but tell us at least one.
Honestly, if I am completely honest, the thing that has surprised me the most is that I love it. And the reason I say that is because I never wanted to pastor. So Dr. Simmons, you would know that. I was itinerant. I was preaching 42, 45 weeks out the year, going coast to coast. And I loved to get on the plane and go home. And I did not mind playing second chair because you didn't have the full burden of the responsibility and probably the full exposure to folks' critique. and to their commentary on your leadership and your style and all of those things. And so it had kept me from even thinking that that was something that I desired. But once I got in it and connecting with people and realizing it really is a privilege that people give you entree into the most vulnerable parts of their lives, and that they look to you as a source or a guide or a connector to something that is deepening their faith, I have come to love it in a way that I never expected. And so because of that, I treat it as holy. And I am not sure prior to that, I saw pastoring as holy. Because you are holding people's hopes, dreams, faith, beliefs, worldview, everything that you can imagine. God has given you privilege to hold that. And as a result, I am more meticulous, I am more intentional, I am more prayerful about how I handle God's people. And so that came as a surprise to me because I'm a PK. I've been raised in church all my life. And so you think you know until you know. And you really don't know until you are sitting in that seat. And so it's a different feeling when you have to minister to someone on Zoom because they are taking their child off life support and you can't be there. Right? And so I'm grateful that God opened that perspective for me because it makes me honor and view the hard times differently. Because there are times, I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, there have been times when you like, God, look, these your people. You deal with them. I didn't ask for none of this. You know, but when you look at it like that, then you recognize that a lot of what we get that are hard times are really people's fear. They are fearful. And this is the only stable thing in their life. That is giving them strength and giving them power. And so that surprised me that I loved it. Because, you know, other than that, I was going to be C.A.W. Clark on a cane trying to crawl up your pulpit at 85. Still preaching and running revival every day. So I'm grateful that God has granted me this opportunity for as long as, you know, I'm allowed to serve.
Pastor Wesley, what one thing has the
That was so good. I'm sorry, I'm still frozen. That's so good, and that blessed me in ways I cannot articulate. Thank you for sharing that. That blessed my life. Because, and I say that because sometimes we get so bogged down with the stuff that comes with it, we forget the joys of it. That was profound. Thank you for that. That ministered to me in a profound way. Of all the things that I think,
so what one thing?
Of all the things, I think the one thing that was probably most surprising to me, I think I came in with the awareness that this was tough soul work and that you would deal with people that would not always agree with you. You know, you would deal with the tension and the challenges of leadership. I expected that. I think the biggest surprise for me is where the opposition came from. I think sometimes you have in your mind who's going to be for you and who's going to be against you. And then when you get in it, you realize the people that you thought were going to be for you are against you. But some of the people you thought would be against you are going to be for you. So what the things that surprised me most were the people that I thought would be my critics were my champions. And the people that I thought would be champions for me were behind the scenes criticizing. And it literally was a lesson that it is just your job to do what you called to do and not worry about the who's your 300, you know, and getting in turn, who's fighting with you and who's not. But that was probably the biggest surprise of it for me. The fact that you thought the people in your corner wouldn't be, but the people you thought were on the other side of the ring were in your corner.
What one thing was the most surprising you?
I was prepared for the workload. I was prepared for opposition. I was prepared for what I thought came with pastoring. I was prepared for the preaching. I was prepared for the opposition. I was prepared for the workload. What I was not prepared for was grief. And before I came to Light of the World, my mom had died 5 years ago, and I had navigated that grief, and I live with the grief of my mother's passing. I'm an only child. She was a single mom my whole life, so it was me and her. So when she died, it left a major mark on me. But I navigated that grief responsibly so that I would not bleed on the people while pastoring. What I was not prepared for was being here at Light of the World. Now that I have been here a few years, I am now burying members that I care for. When I first got here, I really didn't know the people. They really didn't know me. So I did I love preaching funerals. I think it is one of God's best gifts to a pastor to preach somebody to the next life. And so I love preaching funerals, but I was preaching funerals for strangers with integrity. But there came a point in my pastorate where I stopped burying strangers and I started burying friends.
Yes.
And I was not prepared for the grief that came with burying people that I've come to love and cherish. And part of me feels like we don't prepare pastors well for the grief that comes with the ongoing, heart-wrenching, heartbreaking grief of funerals. And I asked, in fact, Pastor Pressley, I asked Pastor Branch, I was like, I don't know how you did this for 40 years. I don't know how I don't know how preachers and pastors pastor for 30 years and 40 years, and they bury people over, and so this is the part that has been surprising for me. And I did not realize the degree to which my therapy, because I have a therapist, because I think as a responsible pastor, you should have a therapist, but I didn't anticipate the ways that my therapy appointments would shift from talking about me and my personal life to how I'm navigating the grief of losing church members.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Murdoch said, and you said your therapy, you were frozen.
I realized
you said
there was a shift
from the personal to what?
And I needed my therapy appointments to help me navigate the grief of losing church members. And here was one thing that my therapist said to me that blew my mind, and I shared it with the church after my therapy appointment. She said to me, every new loss you have opens up all the old ones. She said, so every time you experience the loss of a new church member, it opens up the grief that you've had for all the previous ones, in addition to my own personal grief. And so that helped me to prepare better for the emotional roller coaster that comes. Because even though I've got to bury somebody on a Thursday or Friday or Saturday, I still got to get in the pulpit and preach on Sunday. And so all of that, I just wasn't prepared for the ways I would have to pack my grief away and tuck it away because I had to be on Sunday morning.
Pastor Mitchell?
Yes, ma'am. I've been sitting here trying to think of the right way to put this. Can you hear me? I've been sitting here trying to figure out the right way to put this for me. I think by virtue of sitting in this seat, it has become my last seminary course. In that, it has forced me to sit on the seesaw of deconstruction and declaring what I truly believe. That having to do 20, 30 funerals has made me stand at the casket of young people and say, do I really believe what I just proclaimed, given the circumstances of how this happened? What do you really think about this and that we talked about in theory in seminary, but that I've had to wrestle with living it out and speaking on behalf of God to the people in real time. Second part of that seesaw of my own personal deconstruction by virtue of sitting in the seat is the ability to declare what it is that you believe, right? So now as our church continues to grow, I am finding that I am being interviewed by prospective members in a way that I've never seen.
Okay, Pastor Mitchell,
in my own upbringing.
Pastor Mitchell, we're going to ask you
yes
to hold your thought.
Okay.
Pastor Mitchell, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead. Repeat the last part of what you said.
The last part of what I was saying is there's a personal deconstruction. Okay. That there's a personal deconstruction.
Repeat what you said.
Yes, ma'am. Sitting in this seat has led to its own personal deconstruction where I have to break down and really look at what do you truly believe, speaking as the voice of God, but also being able to articulate that has become something that I was surprised about. As our church continues to grow, people are hearing there's this buzz. I heard about your church. Now we're thinking about coming. Is this safe space for me? Can my partner and I show up here together? What is your theology on this and that? This is before they ever walk into the doors of the church. And there are seasons where I think people are excited that folks have an interest, but now you have to be an apologist before they even come and have your statement of faith in a place where you can articulate it to people. And that has surprised me. That I am having to date potential members and be very clear about where I stand on certain things, where our church stands on certain things, as a result of the growth that we are experiencing. And it's been surprising.
Okay, Pastor Pressley.
Yeah, so this might not translate to everybody, but I pastor in my hometown, and to now lead a ministry that is one of the foremost ministries.
What one thing has surprised you?
Yeah, so loss of anonymity. That surprised me. Okay, like I born and raised in the city. I've had friends I've gone to high school with, friends, I got frat, in the city, and the loss of anonymity is a thing. And I would say that I'm more of an introverted personality, so I like to know who's coming to me versus not knowing. And I mean, I tell you, they're so difficult to do anything in this city without somebody being like, Pastor Q. And I'm like, how do I know you? And that has been a real adjustment. It's forced me to really live an integrous life, to ensure that I sweep around my own front door, and to make sure that my reputation does not harm the character of the ministry and the witness that I have of God. And so that has been an adjustment. Again, being in this hometown here of Detroit City, that surprised me a bit. Because again, I've been in ministry here in the city for like 15, 20 years now, and I've been able to kind of still hold some of my humanity, if you will. But as soon as that lead pastor title got laid on, I mean, it was crazy. It has been crazy.
You can't go nowhere.
Nowhere.
At the Wendy's, they say, I remember you. You ran revival at I just want a Frosty.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Can I get a Frosty? That's it.
It's a ministry, the Frosty
It
ministry.
is.
Definitely, we are out of time, but I quickly to Thomson is always going to keep us. We're out, but I just want to, because I know the people listening want to this. It's difficult now pastoring, especially in rural America. Pastor Thomson, if you could give to those who are going to become pastors, if you could give them one piece of advice, and I need everybody to be quick, no long response, just one piece of advice, what would it be?
Make your calling and election sure. I have learned in this process that the call to pastor is very different than the initial call to ministry, and that you need to be very clear that you are being called to shepherd God's people in this season and at this time, because there are a lot of people who are doing it because that was just the career path that was set before some in seminary, or that is what they thought was going to be a path to exposure and platform. But at the end of the day, you need to love people. Like, you can't hate the people and pastor them. So just make sure that that call is clear and not be pushed or pressured by anybody. That would be my one piece.
Okay, one thing for those who are going to believe God is calling them to be senior pastors.
If the election has already been made, know your Bible and your bylaws inside and out before the first day. I borrowed that from Dr. Terry Eugene Mackey. There were things that we wanted to help some people at the beginning of our time together that ended up being reversed because I launched a program incorrectly according to the bylaws. So learn your bylaws and Bible inside and out before the first day. That's 1 of 20 I give.
All right. Pastor Pressley, what one thing would you tell?
Don't lose sight of your family. Okay, and I know oftentimes that's stated in your spouse, but your parents, your siblings, your family of choice, because oftentimes the work of ministry can be overwhelming. Please do not lose sight of your family.
Don't lose sight of your family. Pastor Wesley, what one to tell?
Never allow the call to pastor to make you neglect development of yourself as a person. Always desire to be,
Pastor Wesley,
always be a better, desire to be a better person than you are, pastor. Don't neglect your own personal spiritual growth, your own soul development, your own need for pursuit of peace in your mind and in your heart for the work, because we cannot pour from empty pitchers. So develop you even above your desire to be a good preacher or be a good leader. Always seek to develop the ability to be a good person.
all right. Pastor Pittsburgh, one thing.
My one thing would be get a therapist. We have expectations of those in our congregations to make responsible choices for themselves. And we as leaders also have to make responsible decisions for ourselves. Having a therapist enables us to be introspective, reflective, and self-aware of the things that we carry knowingly and unknowingly. So having a therapist is helpful as we lead in a very turbulent time in our world.
All right, all right. I apologize everybody who tuned in of the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what's caused them all, but trust me, I'm going to have tech folk working on them after all of this. Thank you, thank you, thank you to my amazing guest. Somebody said we needed to do, and I will have a group of on in 2024. We're going to do a part 2. Cash App as an independent scholar, half days, and what do I always say at the end of every broadcast? Share the video. Share the video. It won't cost you anything. Share the video. Bless. And if I don't talk to you again before the holidays are over, happy holidays. Bye, y'all.